Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the February 24th Lebanon City Council meeting. Our first order of business will be the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilman Messenger, will you lead us, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, next we'll move on to the roll call members. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Sure. Councilman Kincaid is absent this evening. Councilman Campbell.
Here.
Councilman Edwards.
Here.
Councilman Robertson.
Here.
Councilman Copeland.
Here.
Councilman Wheat is absent. And Councilwoman Messenger.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay, next we'll move on to the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Are there any changes to those minutes? Okay, we entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I move we approve the minutes of the last meeting.
We have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
I second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Minutes are approved. On to old business. First item up is Resolution 2020-02, which is the consideration of the fiscal plan for the Martin Lemonberger Stewart Indiana Trails Fund property annexation to the city of Lebanon, Indiana. This has been.
Also known as the Waterford Project, for those that...
What is the second name? Martin, what?
I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I think I pronounce it Lemonager.
Lemonager? Okay. Sorry, I always
I
stumble.
apologize if that's somebody's family and I'm saying it wrong. Also. So just to kind of walk through, this is all related to the annexation for the Waterford development, just to remind you of the process here. Before we're able to adopt an annexation ordinance, the council needs to first consider a fiscal plan related to that annexation. So while this is under old business, it's actually a new item on your agenda, but we have to adopt it first, but we're going to move on to the annexation ordinances. So I'll just walk through some of the highlights of the annexation ordinance. As you probably are all remember or aware, the annexation area is all agricultural farm ground. I think there's one house on one of the small pieces of property, otherwise it's all agricultural ground. So population increase as a result of this is estimated to be 2 people from that one house. The rest of it's all agricultural. So then what the fiscal plan looks at then is the added costs to city government associated with annexing the property, and then also projections of additional revenue associated with the annexation. So what the the fiscal plan, the window for that is looking out at 5 years. So we've got probably at least a 15-year development that we're looking at here. So you're really not getting into the meat of the development in 5 years, but you get about 3 years worth of development within that 5-year window. So we will start seeing some additional revenue associated with the project. The same holds true on the cost side. In the next 5 years, there won't be a significant amount of development. So the additional cost to the city as far as providing services are minimal, primarily associated with police and street, because we'll be adding several miles of streets, so there'll be some additional streets that'll have to be paved and maintained. And then police, as development starts happening, will need to be patrolling and use fuel, et cetera. So if you look through that fiscal plan, you'll see that information reflected in the fiscal plan. As far as non-capital services for police protection and street EMS, et cetera, they're really the only costs that they're expecting that are going to be expected in the first 5 years will be associated with non-capital expenditures. On the capital improvement side, essentially indicates that any costs associated with extending water and wastewater services is going to be borne by the developer. So there would be no cost to the city to provide those services. That's what we have estimated at this point. That may change as we get into it, because there's a fairly significant cost associated with that. There may be some improvements that the utilities have to make in order for those extensions to be possible. But in terms of right now, any major expenditures associated with extending that water and wastewater services be borne by the developer. Stormwater, street construction, sidewalks, again, as the development occurs, the developer will install all of those things, so there would not be any costs associated with the capital improvements associated with those. So again, costs are minimal associated with capital. On the fiscal impact side, the existing assessed value of the agricultural property would increase. The assessed value is about $290,000, so we're not going to see a huge increase in our assessed value associated with annexing farm ground, which is, I'm assuming, what everybody would expect. But then as the property starts to develop in the next few years, then you see that potential revenue increase. And probably where I'll focus the rest of my discussion on here is on the Appendix 1, page 12 and 13. And this is where they break down the estimated assessed value and tax rate impact, and then a summary of the cost versus revenue. So on page 12, this is where you see the estimated change in assessed value based on the annexation area. So if you look at the assessment years, the dark line shows when the annexation will be effective. So the first time we would see any assessed value increases is 2021, pay 2022. And that's the $289,715 I mentioned. That's the existing assessed value of the property. Those numbers start to increase in 2022, pay 2023, and then the following years as development starts occurring. We had the applicant provide us with development projections showing how many houses per year and estimated assessed value for those homes, and also in commercial industrial as well, what they think the potential assessed value might be on an annual basis for development in those areas. So these assessed value numbers come directly from the development projections provided by the developer. You see it goes from $289,000 to almost $19,000, then $45,000, then $63,000 by the fourth year. If you follow that across, you can kind of see how that impacts the net assessed value and total assessed value, and then the property tax levy of the city is in column 4. What I had them do in discussions is that rather than the increase in assessed value, if you're looking to try to keep the property tax levy the same, would actually decrease the property tax rate. What I indicated to them was we would want to try to keep the property tax rate the same and then see how that changes the tax levy. So that's what you see reflected here the next few years as 0.8264 for the property tax rate, and then it drops to 0.8165 in the last year. So it stays roughly the same for each of those years. And as you see, the property tax levy of the city increases from about $8 million to about $9.5 million in those 4 years as a result of the increase in assessed value of the annexed area. So that kind of gives you an idea of how the change in revenue associated with the project. And then if you move on to page 13, then it shows you a summary on the top of that page of the costs that would be associated with the project over the next 4 years, increasing from about $7,500 to about $17,000 over the 4 years. And then the probably most important, it would be looking at the summary of the net impact on the bottom of that page. So you can see the estimated levy increases, and then estimated additional costs, and then net impact the first year, because your costs start right away as soon as the annexation occurs, but you don't see any additional tax levy until a year afterwards because we're in arrears. So we are at a net impact of negative in that first year of about $1,700, but then as you can see in 2022, 2023, and 2024, the net impact is significantly positive, up to about $340,000, $335,000 by 2024. Of the revenue generated by the project, or tax levy generated by the project, versus the costs. So that's, in general, a quick rundown of that fiscal impact. Are there any questions that I can answer about that?
Any questions for Ben? Okay. I think we're good. Anything else you need to say?
No.
Good, okay. Any public comment concerning resolution 2020-02? At this time, I would entertain a motion concerning resolution 2020-02.
I'll make a motion, we approve resolution 2020-22, the fiscal plan for the Martin, Lemiger, Stewart Trails Fund property annexation to City of Lebanon.
Assuming you mean 2020-02. I know it's got a lot
sorry.
of twos and zeros in there.
2020-02.
Okay, we have a motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? All right, that is adopted. Next up is ordinance 2020-02. Ordinance, not resolution now. So go ahead, Ben.
Very good. We're just using all the same twos and zeros tonight, it looks like. So this is the annexation ordinance that was introduced in first reading last time related to the Waterford development. I will point out there is a one change that we made since the last meeting, and that was in discussions with both Baker Tilly as they were putting the fiscal plan together, and then also with Mr. Shine, our city attorney. There is one piece of property that's part of this annexation that is separate from the main part of the annexation that's up just on the north side of 100 South, closer to the fairgrounds. There's a little triangle-shaped piece of property up there, and it was recommended by Baker Tilly and then confirmed by Mr. Shine that that should be in a separate annexation ordinance because it's not contiguous to the rest of the annexation area. It is contiguous to the city. It meets all contiguity requirements for annexation. It's just not physically attached to the rest of the annexation, so they recommended including that in its own annexation ordinance. So the only change from the ordinance you saw last time, 2020-02, is that we took out that triangular shaped piece of property and moved it to a separate ordinance that'll be later tonight on your agenda. Otherwise, we were looking at the same thing, the same ordinance that you saw last time. We got all the legal descriptions properly written and included, and the property boundaries. So if there's any questions about this, I'd be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Ben concerning ordinance 2020-02?
Do you have a map of that property
Yeah.
again? Could you show that, please?
We'll use the overhead technology here. Hopefully the glare isn't too bad. Well, the glare's pretty bad. Let's see if I can. It's a little bit better. So this is the annexation area. The main part of it is, so this is 100 south on the north here, 400 east runs through right here. So the main part of it is this property you see right here, and then there's a couple of additional properties on the east side of 400 east. And they are all physically adjacent to each other and could be included in one annexation document.
Thank you.
So Ben, I noticed too, those sections that are east of 400 are in Worth Township, not in Center Township.
Correct.
Are there any regulations we have to go by that for crossing township?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. Any additional questions for Ben concerning ordinance 2020-02? Okay. Rob, do you mind reading it on second reading and then open up for public comment?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Again, this is ordinance 2020-02, annexing certain territory to the city of Lebanon. 100% of the owners of the parcels proposed for annexation are identified in Exhibits A and B, and they filed a voluntary petition with the council pursuant to Indiana Code. As stated previously, the Lebanon Advisory Plan Commission held a public hearing at its meeting on January 21st, 2020, and forwarded docket 20-06 to this council with a favorable recommendation, 6-0, to assign a single-family zoning classification to the annexation area. This council conducted a public hearing on January 27th, 2020, as required by law. This council has adopted a fiscal plan for the annexation area, and the annexation area meets the contiguity requirements set forth in Indiana Code. So therefore, this annexation area, which again is generally located on the south side of 100 South and both the east and west sides of 400 East and adjacent to the existing corporate limits along the southern and western boundaries of the annexation area, are hereby declared annexed to and declared a part of the city of Lebanon. It's further to include the contiguous public highways and right-of-ways. It's assigned the Council District 2 and shall become a part thereof immediately upon the effective date of the ordinance. And this, again, annexation area will be assigned a single-family residential zoning classification and shall be in full force and effect upon its passage by this council, its publication, and the passage of the applicable 30-day waiting period.
Okay, ordinance has been read on second reading. Is there any public comment concerning this ordinance? Nope. No sudden movements. Okay. Any further discussion from council? Okay. We'll entertain a motion concerning ordinance 2020-02.
I'll make a motion, we approve ordinance 2020-02, the ordinance of annexation of certain territory to the city of Lebanon.
Okay, we have a motion to adopt in a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, that ordinance is adopted. Next up is, that's all I have for old business. Is there anything from council? Okay, move on to new business then. Next up is Lebanon Bike Park update. Kevin Kulik. Actually, Ben, would you prefer if we did the consent to take the agenda out of order? Are you fine? Consent? Okay, let's bring up ordinance 2020-03 then. A little more streamlined for us.
I'm going to stay for the bike park discussion anyway, but thank you. As I mentioned before, we created 2020-03, the ordinance to incorporate the one final piece of this annexation that was not contiguous to the rest. So just to get your bearings here, this is 100 South, the fairground's just here to the west. This triangular shaped piece is just on the other side of the railroad right-of-way as part of this annexation request. We did split it out into a separate ordinance because it's not contiguous to the rest of the annexation area, which is to the south of this area on the other side of 100 South. So we did create a separate ordinance, 2020-03, for this this annexation. We've got all the correct legal descriptions and petitions. And talking with Mr. Shine, we did. This property was included in all the public hearings at the Plan Commission and the public hearing that was required of the council. So it has met all of the public hearing requirements. So even though we split it out into a separate ordinance, it has been through all the required public hearings as the piece of property is concerned. So I just I would ask you to consider the possibility of suspending your rules to adopt this on first reading, since it has been worked its way through the process, even though it's a new ordinance.
Yeah, so this was included in the first reading ordinance of 2020-02. Again, it's been clarified. So if council would like, we could move this directly to second reading tonight. It does require unanimous consent of council. So I'm open if there's discussion, if there are thoughts of moving this directly to second reading. Again, as been noted, it has already been noticed as annexation. Just from a legal standpoint, we thought it'd be clarified if it's under two different ordinances versus just all in one. So any concerns, suspending the rules, moving to second reading on ordinance 2020-03?
This is one property owner, there's not multiple?
Correct, it's the
It's
same.
one property owner. It's the same as the other annexations, it's just a separate piece.
Yep.
Okay.
Do I have a unanimous consent to suspend the rules and move to second reading on ordinance 2020-03?
Need a motion? Want a motion? I'll make a motion, we suspend the rules and adopt this on second reading.
We're not adopting yet, we're just suspending the rules for this time.
I'll second for
We have-
suspending the rules.
We have motion to suspend the rules, move to second reading on ordinance 2020-03. I'll let Rob read the ordinance now.
Thank you, Mayor. Council. Ordinance 2020-03, again, is an ordinance annexing certain territory to the city of Lebanon. As stated in the prior ordinance, 100% of the owners of the parcels proposed for annexation are identified in Exhibits A and B. The annexation area, the Lebanon Advisory Plan Commission held its public hearing at its meeting on January 21st, 2020, and forwarded docket 20-06 to the council with a favorable recommendation 6-0 to assign single-family residential zoning classification to the annexation area. The council, this council has conducted a public hearing on January 27th, 2020. This council adopted its fiscal plan for the annexation area, and it meets the contiguity requirements by Indiana law. Therefore, this annexation area, which again is generally located on the north side of 100 South, 2,000 feet east of Indianapolis Avenue and adjacent to the existing corporate limits along the southern boundary of the annexation area, is hereby declared annexed to and declared to be a part of the city of Lebanon. It is to include the contiguous public highways and rights-of-ways, and it's again assigned Council District 2. The annexation area is assigned single-family residential zoning classification, and it shall be in full force and effect upon its passage, its publication, and upon the passage of the applicable 30-day waiting period.
Thank you, Rob. Also wanted to clarify too, the fiscal plan contemplated this parcel as well too. So resolution 2020-02 included this parcel as well. So any further discussion from council? Any public comment concerning ordinance 2020-03?
Susie Beal, 2475 South 400 East. It's not exactly on this subject, but it's as close as I can get and be able to be on record asking this question. I understand suspending the rules as far as having to notify the neighbors of having a second reading for this particular item. My question kind of extends into the full Waterford development with annexation, rezoning, all of that, and the fact that you don't have to notify, or you only have to notify property owners within 300 feet of the particular portion being talked about in that section, or however, I don't know how to word that. My question is, how can I be on the short list to know any time that those things are being put on the agenda? For example, at 7 o'clock, I checked for the agenda online, and the agenda wasn't even online for this meeting tonight. How can I know? The only reason I knew is because I happen to know a couple people that work in the building. How can I know the agenda to know if I want to sit in on any of those readings for future, because my property is outside of the 300 feet of those?
Thank you for your comments. So our agendas are always posted physically here in municipal building 2 days before, 24 hours before the council meeting. But I guess if you wanted to talk with our planning department, I'm sure I don't know if you guys have an email distribution list for this project then. But we've done that on engineering projects throughout the city that if we send out updates. So I'm sure some sort of mailing list could be developed for that for you. So if you wanted to touch with Ben afterwards, he can get that for you. Yep. Any other public comment? Okay. Any other discussion from council concerning ordinance 2020-03? Okay. Go ahead and entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion, we approve ordinance 2020-03.
We have a motion to adopt. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second from Sierra. Motion and a second for discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Ordinance 2020-03 is adopted. All right, now we'll move on to the...
I just wanted to, real quickly before we move on, just keep you guys posted on the process. So we'll publish the notice of the annexation in the paper tomorrow. After the 30-day waiting period, the applicant does intend to come back in to amend their PUD ordinance to include this additional property. So you'll see that come back to you probably in late April or early May. So just so you're aware when it's coming back, it really, they're not changing the actual PUD ordinance itself other than to amend it to include the rest of this annexation territory. So you'll see this again in a month or two.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is the Lebanon Bike Park update. Kevin?
Thank you, council members, for your time this evening. I sent around, I'm not handing anything out new, but I did want to just give you hard copies of the bike park concept plan, so you would have that in front of you, just in case you didn't bring your copy. I thought if it would be okay for the council and the mayor and clerk treasurer, if I could just, I'll give you try to be as brief as I can on this and kind of start at the beginning. So this really, the whole bike park concept idea really started late last year with a few of us around City Hall talking about, wow, we have that 110 acres of land up next to the golf course. Seems like there's an opportunity there. What could that possibly be? What could that possibly become? What are those opportunities there that we're not foreseeing? And that really spawned itself into conversations about parkland and creating additional park systems, additional amenity offerings to the city that perhaps we don't have today. And one of those things that came up was, what about a bike park? Or more specifically, we're talking about mountain bike trails. So that's where this sort of the nexus of the whole conversation began. was just some internal conversations, some conversations with people that live in the area that have to also have relationships with the city, and we began this idea. We immediately reached out to the Hoosier Mountain Bike Association. They're an advocacy group that builds, maintains, and operates mountain bike trails throughout the state of Indiana. And we reached out to them to see if what they thought about this concept. Immediately, they said that that concept was exciting to them. They have a noticeable lack of trail amenities on the northwest side of Indianapolis. They've been looking to build trails on the northwest side for a long time and have not been successful. So they were excited about an opportunity, a proposition to partner with the city on such a facility. And they began talking to us about some relationships that right now have really risen to the top, and those relationships are with the National Interscholastic Cycling Association. If you don't know who they are, if you haven't looked at some of the information I've sent you, the National Interscholastic Cycling Association is a national group that develops mountain bike racing events, and training facilities, as well as establishes local club teams all over the country. There are 30 different state-ran organizations, chapters, if you will, of NICA, and we recently have one now in the state of Indiana. So this became intriguing, this idea that we could partner with this national organization for the development of this facility, the development of trails, the development of a program that will get one of their catchphrases or their hashtags that they're really focusing on right now is this idea of more kids on bikes, or hashtag more kids on bikes, trying to get more kids active in the community, more kids into athletic programs that maybe don't fit the norm of your traditional, three sports that most of us grew up with, baseball, football, and basketball. So that became a really exciting conversation that we began having with NICA, and then that led to us setting up a day-long series of workshops to look at this facility, to bring representatives from NICA and Hoosier Mountain Bike Association, as well as some other advocacy groups to the site, to walk the site, to understand what the possibilities could be, and also host a community workshop to get community feedback. So that happened on January 28th. We were overwhelmed by the turnout. Up until that point, initial Facebook post, social media post about the potential workshop touched almost 20,000 people. And since then, our totals of people that we've reached on social media are climbing upwards of almost reaching 30,000 people. So we've been overwhelmed by the amount of response that we've seen, by the underlying bicycle and mountain bike culture that seems to be permeating in this area of the state, and just the support from those advocacy groups, from those riders, have been just overwhelming. So we had this workshop, and we had over 80 people in the room, and it was an exciting opportunity to hear what they wanted to see with this facility. We also had a couple of neighbors that were, to say the least, concerned about a park being developed on this property. But I will say I've now met individually on a couple of occasions with the concerned neighbors, and I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that they're on board and they're ready to buy a mountain bike and excited about the facility going in near their property. But I will say now that they understand what the facility could be, they are accepting of this type of amenity. So I'm hoping that the council, as well as the community at large, also find this proposal accepting. So what I really wanted to present to you today was this update for what the concept plan looks like. We started off our workshop with a much different concept plan. We heard some of those complaints. We began starting to move trails from the perimeter of the site into the interior of the site. I guess I could put this up here for the public to see. So this plan is drastically different than where we started. And again, we heard from those concerns. We started bringing the trails into the perimeter of the site so they were less disruptive to the adjoining properties. The more intensive uses that you see down here were originally planned to be sort of on the high ground in the middle of the site. Again, we feel as though these were more conducive to being better neighbors if we looked at the south end of the site, looked at the area near US 52. So a lot of changes took place based on the public feedback that we received. But ultimately, what I want to talk to you about was, yes, show you this plan, and we can get into more details of that if you want to, if you have questions. But what we've really started to lay out is some goals, some objectives, some opportunities that we think are important for this facility. Ultimately, first and foremost, what I would say is most important is this idea of creating an active, family-friendly, family-based facility. We want to create this family-friendly, this kid-friendly park experience with opportunities that we don't currently have within our park system. We want to create opportunities for all riders of all ages, all skill levels. I caution you that if you go out and you Google mountain biking, you're going to see some very extreme videos. This is not what this facility is. This is not a Red Bull racing facility. This is not an extreme mountain bike facility. This is very much family-focused, family-friendly. This is an opportunity for all families to get out and get active with their children. We want to promote an active, healthy community. We want to promote active, healthy community events, and we think this is a neat facility that creates those opportunities. As I said, we want to create these opportunities for families riding trails together. We want to create these healthy lifestyle opportunities for our citizens and our young families. And really families of all ages, because we think this is a facility that meets all those requirements. And this really leads into the next goal and the next opportunity that we see, and that is this partnership with NICA. This will be next up on the agenda. We've got a draft MOU that is before you, this memorandum of understanding between the city and NICA for how we might promote the facility. But ultimately, what we want to create with the partnership of NICA is a sustainable trail system for training, for events, for NICA-sanctioned races at this facility, and we think that is a unique opportunity for us. We think there's an opportunity to create a progressive riding center with progressive trails and features that will provide challenges for all levels and to develop riders. We think this also, with that partnership from NICA, becomes a regional hub for the cycling community, and that would host NICA-level skills clinics and racing events. Ultimately, if this were to move forward, this MOU would put us in a position with NICA where we would create the first in the nation facility professionally designed from the ground up to meet their requirements. And keep in mind, NICA is a facility, or is an entity that promotes and hosts racing events, off-road racing events for middle school and high school students. And so that is what they want. This is their goal of getting more kids on bikes. But again, this would put us in a situation where there are no other facilities in the country. Yes, they exist in 30 other states. They host events. They host events in the state of Indiana. Those events are hosted at existing mountain bike facilities where they do their best to utilize those facilities in ways that meet their requirements. But no facility to date has been designed from the ground up, meeting all of their safety requirements. Again, these are middle school to high school students. These are entry-level riders. These are novice to intermediate level skill sets at most. So what that really does is promote a trail that is designed for the youngest and for the least experienced. This is a trail that's easy to ride, and again, leads into our first objective for the project, which is to create this active, family-friendly, kid-friendly facility. The next goal I would say is important to us is that this is sensitive to our surroundings. As many of you know, this is a former landfill site. We feel as though the concept we're developing is sensitive to the landfill, that it will maximize the use of those landfill areas, that it will protect those landfill areas. We also see this as an opportunity to clean up this area. When I say clean up, we're not talking about going in and excavating the landfill material. We're talking about cleaning up on-site surface garbage and refuse that is accumulated on the site over the years. Again, we would have to protect the landfill cap and not disturb that, and we would have to put monitoring in place to ensure that that is protected. But what we would see is also an opportunity that we could clean up the site. There's a lot of surface debris and refuse out there, and this would give us an opportunity to do that, to create this landfill maximized, weather-resistant, one-of-a-kind facility for our region. We would also minimize any impacts to any environmentally sensitive areas on the site. We're staying away from drainage areas. We're staying away from areas that seem to be lower, wetter areas, where there may even be springs that are feeding into the groundwater and surface water systems. We see this as an opportunity to improve the quality of the water and the air in that facility, and to protect the habitat. As you can see, the north end of the site, which is primarily untouched and primarily virgin ground, we're not going to disturb most of that. These are mountain bike trails. These are trails that are 2 to 3 feet wide. They're dirt trails. These are not paved trails that you might be familiar with, say, the Big Four Trail or the Monon. These are much different. We also want to minimize any social impacts of the facility. Again, by separating from our neighbors with the more active areas, we want to make sure that we're minimizing any potential parking impacts, traffic impacts, impacts to sound sheds or view sheds from our neighbors. We want to make sure that we are good neighbors. Again, I think the next thing that I would want to talk about, and this really goes back to the relationship with NICA, is the economic development and tourism aspects of this. Again, if we're developing a compelling, sustainable trail system that is one of a kind, that is very unique to Lebanon, we're partnering with NICA, we're going to draw riders into this facility for training and for events, because we're creating a much different trail experience, and this is going to be something unique to the region. Again, by developing this event venue, we're going to have probably 3 to 4 NICA-sanctioned races every year out there once this is fully up and running. And this will provide us the opportunity where those riders are coming into town from across the state, from across the region, bringing their families with them, staying in our hotels, eating in our restaurants, shopping in our shops. So we think this is a unique opportunity to create some viable economic development improvements. The other part of that is looking at partners with local businesses. We've already been seeking partnerships with local businesses. I have about 12 different businesses we've already set up meetings to talk about potential partnerships, potential sponsorships of the facility. I'm not at this time at liberty to give you any real names or dollar amounts that are being talked about, but I am excited for where these conversations are going, and I think we've got strong partners with local businesses because they understand the tourism and economic development impacts of participating and sponsoring on such a facility as this. So that's really what I have for you tonight, is just to update you on where we stand. I'd love to have more conversations about how we can go from this concept to actually delivering a project. Again, we think this is real attainable. We think we've got strong corporate sponsors that will help to facilitate this project, both from a financial standpoint as well from a promotion standpoint. We would like to ask you to consider further authorizing us to proceed through the development of construction drawings. And, I know this is something that would be down the road, but I would like to have a conversation about where this council stands in terms of appetite for funding such a facility. With that, I'll turn it over to the mayor or anyone else that might have questions about where we've come from and where we think we're going.
Thanks, Kevin. Any questions for Kevin from the board?
Kevin, I do have two questions. Sarah, do you want to go?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. This seems like a great idea, but it feels very heavy with NICA. Are there going to be other options for other organizations to come in? And how is this maintenance of understanding overlap with use by other potential parties? I mean, are they going to be, it appears that they're going to be helping with the design and drawing events in, but is there going to be an actual maintenance assistance or cleanup or anything like that after events?
Absolutely. We see NICA as a key stakeholder in this, but not the only stakeholder, and certainly not an exclusive stakeholder. And maybe I didn't reiterate these points enough, but at the end of the day, this is a public park. It is designed from the ground up to meet their design criteria to hold races there. But at the end of the day, this is a public park. We would share in responsibilities associated with overseeing the design and making sure that this meets their design criteria. We would share in marketing of the facility. But at the end of the day, at most, they're hosting 4 events out here in a given year. The rest of the time, we might have local NICA teams, whether that's a team from our region specifically or other areas of, mid-central, north-central Indiana that might use this facility from time to time for training. But again, those training level events that those teams might put on, those would not detract or prohibit the public use of the facility. That would be very key, that this would remain a public riding facility, similar to other park trail systems like Town Run Park in Indianapolis or Brown County State Park. These would be public trails. We also are in the process of discussing what an agreement might be with the Hoosier Mountain Bike Association for maintenance of the trail. They have already expressed an interest to come alongside us. There would probably be a future MOU that we would be talking about whereby they would do the brunt of the heavy lifting for maintenance of the trail, training locals to also help them and training those local volunteers to participate in that, organizing workday events, as well as helping our Parks Department staff. We would want to make sure we had a base level of understanding of how to maintain trails, but they are all already very much on board with helping us to maintain the trail system.
So my next question is kind of twofold. The first is if and when NICA decide or request to have a event weekend taking up the whole park, and it's not necessarily beneficial to the public to just come in at their own will there be some sort of agreement where it's like a quote-unquote rental, kind of like the pool is? Or, and then also, I'm drawing a blank, I'm sorry. I'll think of it. So the
Yeah.
first one was rental agreement if they come
No,
into a
that's a good
situation like that.
question. I would foresee there would be another NICA MOU at some point once we're talking about the specifics of hosting race day events. This NICA MOU is more about the development of the facility, more about shared marketing of the facility. It doesn't get into the weeds of exactly how race day events are executed. Now, we know from conversations with them, in terms of executing race day events, they're doing all the heavy lifting in terms of marking the trails and putting up the barricades and being ready to host those events, the timing of those events, awards, all those things that come along with it. So those issues, I think, are a separate conversation for a separate time. Now, I would not envision, and this is, again, conversations for later time period, I wouldn't envision NICA renting the facility from the city. I would envision that that's part and parcel to this understanding of this partnership, is that, for those 3 to 4 events a year that they host, the park would be temporarily closed on that day or that weekend because there is a race. But that's no different than, say, the Mel Kenyon Classic held at Memorial Park, or the Colonial event that's held at the Abner Longley Park. I think those would be similar events. They would certainly be open to spectators. They typically don't charge, and I wouldn't envision they begin to charge for spectators that might want to come out and watch this. but those would be, I think that would be part of this agreement, that when they are hosting events, yes, the park would be temporarily closed for, say, a weekend to set up, host the event, tear down, cleanup would be included in their team as they come in to host these race day events.
Okay, I did think of my last part was, what would be the terms of the conditions for terminating this MOU? I mean, I didn't see it in here, but I didn't know if, things go south, how do we terminate this if we need to?
That's a good question, and we can talk with our attorney on that. I think there ought to be a termination clause to any agreement that we put forth. Again, I don't think there's really any financial stake here in the developing this trail system, because we want to develop a family-friendly, all-purpose trail system, that we could use regardless. But obviously, we would want to have protections, and some of those have already been incorporated into the agreement by our legal staff. But that could be something, if this body would want to move forward with that MOU, I think that should be subject to legal review, and we could add provisions to that.
Okay. I may have overlooked it, but I didn't see it, so, thank you.
Sure.
Caleb, on the third page, at the bottom, there's item 3, terms 3. There's a spot there that talks about
Okay,
termination.
okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Messenger?
I just kind of want to piggyback off that just a little bit. Have we heard back from IDEM anymore? Because I just know how strict they can be, and I know you guys have had some communication with them, but
Yes.
my worry is before we jump too far in, granted, I want a blanket statement here, I think that this would be a great amenity for the city. I just think before we get too deep, it would be nice to know what their thoughts are, and as far as if they're thinking how much money may need to be put in to make it accessible to the public, since it was a former landfill.
Yes.
That's just something that worries me. I don't want to get really far in and then them say, you need an X amount of dollars to make this the way it needs to be. Does that make
Right.
sense?
No, it's probably the overarching question in the back of all of our minds since we started this is can we, should we, what does it take to develop something like this? We've had several conversations with IDEM. We've also brought alongside an environmental engineering firm, ATC and Associates, who have also had these conversations, and they have a wealth of experience. The project manager that we're working with, ATC, has 40-plus years of landfill reuse experience. So both ATC as well as IDEM have both emphatically said, absolutely, you can reuse a landfill for an active recreation use such as this. They even have written guidelines for such reuse that they have supplied us with, and they have repeatedly said they foresee no issue with permitting such a use. Obviously, there will be conditions on the permit. We're meeting with IDEM on Thursday this week to begin discussing the details of what those permit conditions might be, but there's plenty of precedent for reuse of landfill sites. I can't say there's a bike park in Indiana that I could point to, but I can point to you to bike parks in Lebanon, Ohio, coincidentally, that were developed on a landfill site. The Ohio Office of Environmental Management operates very much the same way the Indiana office does, so I can't imagine there's anything different that they were forced to do, and I've had good conversations with the city engineer, the parks director of Lebanon, Ohio, on what they had to go through. Again, there are processes, there are systems, there are procedures. Basically, it's don't disturb the 3 foot of clay cap that was installed over the landfill, and develop a procedure to regularly inspect that and to correct any issues that might be eroding that cap. So again, I think it's well established that IDEM supports these types of reuses. They've got well-documented written guidelines for how they're to be accomplished, and they've seen similar hiking park trail facilities that have been developed throughout the state. Munster, Indiana has a golf course built on a landfill. So again, there's a lot of precedent for doing just this. Again, not that there's not permitting and concerns associated with it, but if you follow the rules, if you play by their rules, they very much support such a reuse.
I just know we've had a lot of issues in the past with IDEM, them coming in with their restrictions on other properties within the city, so it's just a concern of mine.
Yeah,
That's all.
no, it's a valid concern.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I would probably take a issue with you on about IDEM, what they say, and then they change their mind 10 or 12 different times. They tell you it's okay, and then you do it that way. Then they turn around and say, no, you got to do it this way. We've already been down that road here. So I'm not a real fan of IDEM when they give you their word.
Okay.
So it's got to be a little deeper than that.
Yeah, well,
I don't understand how you cannot disturb the cap when you end up making trails out of it and tracks.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the idea of not disturbing the cap is that we would build up. Anywhere where we would be building over the cap, there would be fill placed on top of it, not excavating into the cap, which obviously prohibits things like utility connections going into the cap. Not that you can't do utilities or footings or foundations into the cap, it just, again, it gets into they have specific guidelines on how you do that. And I wasn't here when some of the violations took place on that site to be involved with what happened. So I guess I can't really speak to that. I'd love to have more conversations about what happened and how we got in trouble and what was said, what was promised by IDEM, and how we avoid those pitfalls in the future. But I guess we've had a very positive level of conversation so far with IDEM, and so far we seem to understand the rules that they're planning to enforce upon us. And again, meeting with them later in the week, hopefully I have more information to share.
Well, I hope so too, but like I said, the proof's in the pudding with them because they change their mind faster than the weather changes.
Understood. Yeah, I would love to hear more. I mean, I've spent most of my career working with IDEM. I've not had that experience, generally speaking. Well, I understand. I guess from my experience, it's just they are an organization built on rules, and if you follow the rules, they're okay. If you step out of line, they have a lot of authority to make your life miserable.
Any additional questions?
You said that you had, with the adjacent property owners or neighbors, they had some issues. What were some of the issues that they brought up to you?
Yeah, there were two main property owners that came to the public workshop that expressed a lot of concerns, very vocally. They were concerned about, the idea of creating, I think maybe there was a perception, as I mentioned earlier, this is not an extreme sports park. This is not Red Bull mountain bike racing. This is much more family-oriented, lower speed, less elevation change type of facility. So I think they were foreseeing and perceiving a very sort of raucous facility with a lot of people and riders out of control and noise and things of that nature. Again, we redesigned those areas to move those and separate those from their properties. And then we've also done a lot of education on what the facility would be planned to be. And again, I think one of those gentlemen is a very outdoorsy type of person, spends a lot of time advocating for parks development in other states, national parks development. And, I think now I would almost count him as a supporter of what we're planning to do because he better understands the perceptions involved. And the other gentleman was just sort of didn't want to be disturbed, didn't want to have, riders disturbing his livestock or his peace and quiet out there. He lives immediately adjacent between this proposed facility and the Trophy Club Golf Course. So I think he's felt the burden of having the golf course developed in his backyard and was concerned about what this might be. And then, there's questions about what type of rider this might attract. Yes, there will be the youth riders there for those events. That'll be very well supervised. But on a daily basis, what do those riders look like? And what I would point to you is that your average mountain bike rider in the state of Indiana is 40 years old, over 40 years old. Your average mountain bike rider in the state of Indiana has spent over $2,000 on his bicycle. So this is not a raucous group of teenagers out there. For the most part, these are people like myself that are doing this for the health benefits, that are very environmentally conscious, very aware of their surroundings, and generally want to put forth a good representation of the mountain bike community, because they're very much a very involved group with their advocacy organizations and trying to open up more mountain bike trail riding in the state of Indiana. So I think there was just some perceptions about what the park might be and how that might disturb their peace and quiet. And I would say I think we've addressed their concerns. Again, I'm not going to stand up here and say they would be here shoulder to shoulder with me advocating for the project, but I believe they're accepting of the project at this point.
Is this a park that you would consider to be open year-round, or is it seasonal?
It's a little bit of both. Yes, I would consider it open year-round, but biking trails, this time of year are pretty much unusable when we get into these freeze and thaw wet seasons. So generally speaking, trails are closed in the winter months unless we've got frozen ground that protects the trail from erosion. So, that would be part of the operation of the facility, would be closing it, would be, notifying the riding community through the advocacy websites that keep track of when trails are green versus when they're red. So that would be part of the operation of the facility.
Thank you.
Yep.
Next. Any additional questions?
Kevin, I'll try to be brief. Has the residents seen this revised plan?
I'm
The
sorry.
residents, the neighbors?
Yes, in fact,
Okay.
we didn't meet with them until we had adopted their comments as best we could, and then I went out personally and met with them, walked the site, walked their property. We even looked at further areas where we could add some screening to eliminate any potential view sheds, and making sure that they're as comfortable as they can be with this sort of being their neighbor.
Well, just for everybody, I did attend the meeting that Kevin had, the public meeting. It was well-attended. The residents there that had concerns, I probably had some legitimate concerns, I'm sure. And they did not, the time I was there, I didn't stay for the whole thing, but the time that I was there, I got the feeling that they could be, things could be worked out with them.
Yeah.
Okay? I was, I've never developed a landfill site, whatever, but I've been around them where they have been developed. I know you can develop on them, and when concerns just like Keith, we want to make sure that nothing happens to the cap of that landfill. I was very well convinced on the construction plans that they have to be bringing materials in and not working materials on the landfill. So that was a good thing, I thought, because they're going to be actually building the trail up and not building right on top of the landfill. So that was a good thing. Now, one of the other concerns that I have is how do we keep motorized vehicles off this thing? That's the only detriment I see is guys with motorized dirt bikes sneaking out there and jumping around and doing things, and they're the ones that are really going to cause a lot more of the real problems, I
Right.
think, the motorized ones.
Yeah, and I think...
What's the plans to really make sure that there's no motorized vehicles of any kind?
Sure. Obviously, a lot of things like that always come down to enforcement. We've moved those areas, those more active areas, down to the south where we can better monitor those, where we could set up cameras to look at the facility on all the time, continuously, to make sure we see if somebody's moving in like that. Again, there's things you can do with developing a series of gates that make it a little more difficult to take larger pieces of equipment into those riding areas. But ultimately, you know, I'd say, just like any of our parks, they're not immune to abuse. You know, but I think we can do the best we can to make sure we're designing access so it is limited, so that we can monitor those as well as we can. The site pretty much has a perimeter fence around it, but there are a few areas where there are gaps in that fence that we will want to make sure we take care of, buttoning up those gaps to make it as inconvenient as possible for anybody that might abuse the facility. And then again, monitoring it on a regular basis so that if someone does get in there and does damage, that we can quickly get those damages repaired and do our best to look through our surveillance and monitoring systems to make sure that those issues, those individuals are addressed properly.
Now, are you looking to try to do some sort of a public-private partnership in funding this thing to construct this thing, or are you looking that this is going to be all a city-funded proposal, or have you got that far yet?
Well, no, I think that's up to you, but I envision a public-private partnership for the funding of this. One of the things we've also talked with NICA and with HMBA, they're both willing to set up, they're both 501c3 nonprofits. So they would both be willing to set up accounts and funds to receive donations so that anybody that would want to participate in the development of the park could have a tax write-off donation available to them. And then they would hold that money at no cost, taking no premiums from that, to be able to apply that to the development of the property. So we've had good conversations with people. We've had good conversations with companies in the mountain biking industry that hopefully are leading towards sort of a naming level sponsor that may be included. But again, you know, I think there's a lot of ways we can do that. I'm certainly actively seeking those sponsors, seeking those partners that would put money into the project. But I guess to back up again, you know, the entire development as the concept is seen here, with all the features and the skills training areas, those skills progression areas, the parking areas, all those improvements included, you know, the project is less than $500,000. So this is not an expensive proposition. Certainly something that the city would be within the city's reach to fund 100%. But I guess we wanted to show you that there is corporate sponsorship, there is a community here that supports this. I think that lends to the viability of the facility, if we can show you that. I would love it if you said, you know, just go build it, Kevin, but I saw that I probably had more of a heavy lifting on my part to show you that community is there to support that, and supporting it not only with, you know, with their coming out to meetings, but supporting it with their dollars.
When you spoke with Lebanon, Ohio, is that, I know obviously every park's different and there's different circumstances, but is that in the realm of, were they able to discuss that with you, the realm of their park? I mean, that's...
Their project, I think, was about a little over a third funded by corporate partners. Probably about 2/3 either funded by the city or through some grants that they received as well. Again, I have about 5 different grants on my desk too that we're looking to apply for. These are local, Convention and Visitors Bureau grants. These are local parks-related grants. So these are small grants. These are nothing like the Next Level Trails grant applications or the federal park and trail grants. But these are smaller grant applications, $5,000 to $10,000 a piece, that we're looking at also pursuing as well. But they did, to get back to wrap up your question, yes, it was about a third corporate partnership, probably less than a third on grant dollars, and then the city picked up the rest.
Was theirs around $500,000 as well?
Theirs was about $220,000.
Okay.
So theirs was a little smaller, on a smaller piece of property, and they didn't have all the skills parks and features in it that we had proposed, and they also didn't need the level of parking on the facility site that we would propose, that's kind of required to meet the NICA requirements. Now, I would say, if we cut out some of the skills progression areas and just met the NICA requirements, our total project cost is probably somewhere in the $300,000 range. So, that's the range that we're talking, 300 to 500,000. 500 is the Cadillac, 300 is the base model.
Thank you.
I'd just like to make this comment. I'm sitting there listening to this, and the whole thing I'm thinking is that this is, I think of Grand Park over in Westfield, where they have amenities of everything over there. And I think this is kind of like our Grand Park right here, that we could have something that basically, that no surrounding county around Indianapolis that I know of really has one, really, do they? That we could have the park, and the park that's with the national, the NICA, which I think would probably be a really good thing, plus the other associations, I think would really be a big thing for the city of Lebanon. I realize it's going to add to our parks. Poor John's probably going to end up getting more staff, and I would suggest that if you guys, if somebody mentioned earlier about a trip to go look at trail maintenance or something for bike trails, I suggest you take John with you, because John's probably going to have to do it. But anyway, I really think this would be a good thing for Lebanon, and Zionsville or Whitestown or somebody's got the Little League diamond they're setting up down there, I think.
I think it's Whitestown now.
Whitestown. I think Lebanon, it'd be nice for Lebanon to have something that we could stand out besides Rick Mount basketball court and park. So, I think it'd be nice that we.
Zionsville is planning to develop a mountain bike trail this year. It won't meet the requirements of NICA, but they are planning to invest in these types of amenities.
Well, then let's have a good one then.
Yeah.
Okay. That's my 2 cents.
Any other questions, comments? Any public comment? Okay. At this time then, as we're kind of combining the two in place, any questions about the MOU agreement with NICA? Okay. Would entertain a motion to approve the...
Rob's reviewed this, right? Have you reviewed this?
I have, and I think based on, some of the comments here, we'll want to make some further changes. There are some termination provisions in there and some other things, but we can broaden that a little bit.
Yeah, I would like to wait till they get through.
Yes, so we can approve it pending final legal review?
Farther down the road. We're way out in front.
Understood.
So again, would entertain a motion to approve pending final legal review?
Yeah, I think we table it and let Rob make any additions or whatever, and then bring it back to us when we're ready, yeah.
Could we do it subject to legal review?
Yeah.
So,
Don't you need to make some adjustments?
Yeah, I think,
Kevin, so one of the things, if you'd like, we could make it subject to legal review, authorize, the mayor, whomever to execute.
yeah, are you gonna, if he makes the changes that you guys wanted to see, we can, then we don't have to bring it
We
back.
want to see the changes before we approve it, guys?
I think they're just minor tweaks.
I was going to say,
I think it's
it's
just
just a
minor
memorandum of
adjustments.
understanding, so it is that correct?
Yeah, there's no
Yeah.
financial agreement with it either, it's just a,
So I think it's, can move forward.
Okay.
okay, so motion,
I motion we approve the memo of understanding with NICA, subject to legal review.
motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Council. All right, next up is ordinance.
Sorry to interrupt. Was there any appetite for executing the remaining portions of the design contract?
Let's circle back on that.
Circle back?
Yep.
Very good.
Don't go away, though. You've got ordinance 2020-04, adoption of updated city standards, first reading. I know this has been to the Board of Works already. Board of Public Works, we reviewed it and approved it, but in order to finalize it, we need to have that in ordinance form. So Kevin, if you wanted to touch on this ordinance.
Absolutely. This is ordinance 2020-04. This is the adoption of Lebanon city standards, the construction details, if you will, that will govern public and private development throughout the city. This is actually amending an existing ordinance that we have in place dating back to 1995. Was the first time we developed what were called the Lebanon utility construction standards at the time. We have, at least I could not find any evidence that we've ever formally adopted with an ordinance level approval any construction standards since 1995. So that is the draft ordinance that's before you, is to adopt our Lebanon city standards and adopt them via this ordinance, giving them the effect and basically rule of law as far as enforcement is concerned.
Rob, I'll have you read this on first reading, and then we'll have questions, discussion from council.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Ordinance number 2020-04 pertains to, it's going to amend the ordinance, as Kevin indicated, 95-07, the Lebanon Standards Ordinance of the City of Lebanon. And the City of Lebanon, through its Board of Works, has established and adopted standards for design and construction of public and private infrastructure, including but not necessarily limited to streets, utilities, drives, storm sewers, water mains, service laterals, and several other provisions in there to be built with the City of Lebanon and its service territories. The Lebanon Utility Service Board has established its standard and adopted standards for design and construction of public and private infrastructure, including all those matters that were listed in the paragraph above it. And so this council would therefore adopt the foregoing recitals. The Lebanon standards would be approved as approved by the Lebanon Utility Service Board on February 5th, 2020, copies of which are on file at the Office of the Lebanon Utilities. And the Lebanon standards as approved for by the City of Lebanon through its Board of Public Works on February 10th of 2020, copies of which are on file with the Office of the City Engineer, are hereby approved and adopted. And as well as the Lebanon standards that the Lebanon Utility Service Board on February 5th, 2020, as well as through the Board of Public Works on February 10th are identical, and here after would be referred as Lebanon standards. They would be these standards would be made available to developers, engineers, surveyors. They would be at the City of Lebanon Planning Department, the Engineering Department, as well as the Lebanon Utilities, and they would be used as necessary for any design and construction of any streets, utilities, drives, storm sewers, water mains, service laterals, sewer mains, lift station castings, erosion control, and trails to be built within the City of Lebanon and its territories. And then anything that would be inconsistent with the provisions of this ordinance would be repealed. First reading.
Thank you, Rob. Any questions for Rob? Or, excuse me, Kevin. I have one for you. So on the local residential streets, essentially a cross-section of a road, I just want to clarify, are we showing a 13-foot center line to edge of, or to back of curb? Or are we showing 13-foot from center line to edge of curb?
I don't have them in front of me. I can verify that.
Okay.
It wouldn't be our intent to build 13-foot to the face of curb. We would see our standard lane width as 11 feet plus curb and gutter.
Okay, I just noticed that, and I wanted to again, I looked at it again after the Board of Works, so,
I will verify.
yeah, because again, I would prefer to see 11-foot and the 2-foot curb versus the 13-foot and then 2-foot, so.
Absolutely, agreed.
Any other questions? Okay. Ordinance 2020-04 has been read on first reading. We'll take that up at our next meeting. Next up is ordinance 2020-05, amendment to Chapter 77, parking schedules concerning the creation of a no parking area north side of William Street, 70 feet west of Meridian Street. Just to bring this attention to the council, this is essentially a result of several complaints we've been getting in the area when we adopted our road standards last year. Essentially, no parking areas from driveways and also from curbs. It creates kind of a unique situation in this road where essentially there becomes kind of a very narrow parking area. And right now, we've had a situation where a homeowner next to Memory Hall has kind of run into some issues with parking there. And essentially, this is to kind of clean that up. So I'll just let you, Kevin, if you want to say anything else.
Yeah, that's very good. Exactly. We've had a lot of complaints related to enforcement issues with the existing parking spaces in this area. And as a result, we've received recommendation from the police department that it would be, we would be better served if we just made that area that's highlighted on the screen in front of you a no parking area. So this is essentially William Street on the north end of Memory Hall, about the last 70 feet before you get to Meridian Street. There are currently 2 or 3 parking spaces there that are bound by a residential driveway on the west, and on the east side we have a pedestrian crossing, an ADA crossing of the street, really that we need to provide relief from. So effectively, once we separate from the drive and once we separate from the crosswalk, there's really no room left for a parking space. So, and given the current issues of enforcement and the recommendations from the police department, we have submitted ordinance 2020-05 that would amend Chapter 77, Schedule 1 of the city code to add that as a no parking area.
Any questions?
Well, I saw on there that someone's parking there. Is that is it in front of a residence or next to a residence that they use that at all times?
Primarily, I think what we have is users of the Memory Hall gym or residents of the Memory Hall apartments or the Ironman development apartments in that area are parking there, and they're just trying to squeeze one too many cars into parking spaces, or they're not parking properly. They're parking outside of the delineated parking spaces and partially blocking the residential driveway on the north side of the road, and that's the source of the complaints. But again, it's difficult to enforce when someone's 6 inches over the line, so that's where we get to the recommendation of the police department that that it would be easier to enforce if there was just no parking permitted in that area.
Thank you.
Okay. Rob, have you read that on first reading?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Ordinance 2020-05 concerns an amendment to Chapter 77 parking schedules. This city has regulated vehicle parking within its corporate limits, and that's set forth in the City Code of Ordinance, Chapter 77, Schedule 1. This change would be as of the effective date of the ordinance, Chapter 77. Schedule 1 of the City Code shall be amended to add the following. As Kevin indicated, it would be referenced parenthetical CCC on the north side of William Street between a point approximately 70 feet west of the west line of North Meridian Street to the west line of Meridian Street. All remaining portions of Chapter 77 shall not be affected by this ordinance and shall remain in full force and effect.
Any public comment concerning that? Further discussion from council? Okay. Ordinance 2020-05 has been read on first reading. Again, we'll take that up at our next meeting. Any new business come before the council? Okay, we'll move on to claims or entertain a motion.
Make a motion, we pay the claims.
We motion to pay the claims. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Any announcements, discussion?
Fish fries start this Friday at St. Joe's.
Okay. Anything else?
I make a motion, we adjourn.
One second. On those fish fries, are we doing one of those for the baby box or not?
That is yet to be determined, but we are collecting funds for donations at the baby box, for the baby box at the fish fries, yes.
Okay. Thanks,
5
Caleb.
to 7 p.m.
Okay. All right, we have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, our next city council meeting will be Monday, March 9th at 7:15 PM. Thanks for watching. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
I did have a question on that bike park.